everyone. It's Frances Widdowson here, and we have an unexpected treat today because I was just having a conversation with my friend Jim, and we said, well, we should really record this because we've been talking about that. And we said, why not? We have 2 hours to spare. So this is what's going to be happening over the next couple of hours for people who are unaware of the disputations format. So this is the rational space disputations. The format is to have 1 hour where I interview a guest, someone whose views I find very interesting, and I definitely find Jim's ideas very interesting. And then the next hour, the screens are turned, and then the guest interviews me so that we can not leave anything out, and as well, the power imbalance can be rectified, and things can be sorted out if they need to be sorted out. So Jim is an interesting guy, and I first interacted with Jim a few months ago when I did the podcast, the Quillette podcast on the unmarked graves, and Jim contacted me, and then he gave me a few links of his interactions that he's had, and one of them was with Benjamin Boyce, and I highly recommend that interview that Jim did because it goes into Jim's background in a cult in, I guess, in California, and it's fascinating to. Oh, it's not in California. Where is it?
Worldwide, but I was in Canada at the time, and then
Okay.
I slipped away, and then I moved to California for 9 years.
Anyway, so that was interesting, very fascinating conversation. And so Jim's got a lot of ideas, and so Jim, I'll let you introduce yourself, I guess, and you can tell us what you want to tell us about who you are and what you do and what you're currently up to.
Right. Hi, Francis. So my name is Jim Heller. I'm a criminal defense lawyer in Victoria, BC, Canada. It's true, I'm a former cult member. I was in the Guru Maharaji cult, and he was quite notorious back in the 70s. Really, the 70s were his heyday, and he still is extant. He's very trimmed down nub of the cult that he once was. It's kind of sad to see a cult in decline, but he's still around. But anyways, I was into his trip for a while, and then, like I said, I was in that cult in Canada throughout my 20s, and then I slipped away like my 1980, went down to the States. I had family living there. I went back to school. I went to law school, became a lawyer, came back to Canada 1990, and I'm a criminal defense lawyer. I've been here ever since. I'm based in Victoria. I became interested. I don't know. I started like maybe kind of a life of advocacy a little bit when I got online, and I put together with a couple other guys the ex-follower web scene for people that had been in that cult. And I was really super interested in that. And we had like a lot of frisson, a lot of back and forth with the cult for a long time, exposing it, confronting it, getting really ridiculous law society complaints, and just all of that, lots of stuff. 9/11 happened. Within short order, I started to realize that my former cult was small change compared to a much larger thing that I perceived to be cult-like, which was the ideology that allowed these people to do what they did on 9/11. I started to really kind of get into looking at Islam quite critically. And what I immediately realized was how the media was not my friend, because the media wasn't doing that. They weren't asking the obvious questions. And as I started to kind of feel alienated and disappointed by the media, just a vacuum started to fill up with what might be considered kind of conservative ideation. And over time, I became, I guess, conservative, because I'm one of these people that are quite critical of Islam in some respects, not Muslims particularly, but Islam. And there was no place for someone with that kind of thinking in a comfortable mainstream media landscape. So I'm at that point, right after 9/11, I'm starting to feel kind of shuttled into this marginal default. And must be a conservative then. If I'm not a liberal and I don't like what you're saying and I'm scoffing at it, and you're also mocking me and calling me all sorts of names, I guess I'm a conservative. So anyways, lots of stuff happens. I am kind of just, I don't know, lots of things happen. Anyways, fast forward to Trump. God, there's so many things, Francis. God, we could talk about so many things.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
So Trump. Okay, so
But let me just say this. I'm almost finished. I'm finished
okay,
with the
all
little
right.
thing. So then, anyways, so I become a supporter of Trump, and I'm still quite a supporter of Trump, and there's lots to talk about with respect to that and all sorts of things. And the funniest thing is, this is how I want to tie in with the cult that I used to be in. A guy that we used to respect a lot as being like one of the world's experts on cult stuff. His name is Steve Hassan. And Steve Hassan came out with a book called The Cult of Trump. So here's a guy that I used to respect a lot, now calling me a supporter of Trump, a cult member. And so, anyway, Steve Hassan and I had a debate. We kind of debated about his book. It's kind of interesting. If I can always post the link here and people can see that. Yeah. So anyways, that's kind of who I am. I'm really against woke. I'm a lawyer here in British Columbia.
Yeah.
I brought a resolution last year for the AGM for the Law Society, basically critical of two things: critical of initiative that had happened, that the courts had come in with on their own, really at the behest of the transgender activists within the Law Society, to get all lawyers to give their gender pronouns as they introduce themselves in court. I thought that was ridiculous. And I brought a resolution kind of about that. And there's lots of kind of anti-free speech and stuff and all that. So that's it. I could talk on forever, but
no, we got four things that jump out. There's four things that jump out in your introduction, which I think we're going to get a lot of meat out of. There's the cult. So first of all, cult and what cults are. Secondly, Islam, which I think people are afraid to talk about, and you can suffer a lot of implications for that. Like just getting into it and explaining why Islam may or may not be perceived to be dangerous in modern societies. Then we have Trump, which is an interesting topic in its own right. And then we have the whole transgender pronoun compelled speech kind of angle here. So starting with the first one, which is about cults, I'm just interested in your view. Like, what makes a cult a cult? Like, how do we know that what we're seeing is a cult and not just a religion? Like, because are all religions cults, or are some religions cults, and are some non-religious things cults? Like, what is the cult like phenomenon that we're trying to zero in on?
Right. So as you can imagine, I've thought a lot about that definition, had to discuss that definition lots over time. I think, kind of simply put, any ideology that tricks its adherents into abandoning kind of their innate confidence in their own ability to reason and source out information, and deal with it critically and follow that where it may, with maybe various guilt trips or certain kinds of restrictions on even where they allow their minds to go. That's kind of in the running for being a cult. The other critical thing it needs to do, though, it's got to have a mechanism for information deprivation. So when I was in the Maharaji cult, where we followed this young teenage kid from India who we thought was the Lord of the universe, we actually thought that every single cell in our, oh, you're laughing at me. That's so disrespectful.
I'm not, I'm laughing. Like, I find that's amazing to me, that, but like, it's not that unusual, but it just seems, I'm curious as to how people came to see that as something to attach themselves to. It seems mysterious as to how.
So this is the 70s, and there's an incredible fascination with all things Eastern and
Yep.
mystical, and looking for magic doors. People are looking through, for the magic lamp. What was the name of the Narnia book? The first one, the C.S. Lewis one,
Yeah,
Narnia.
yeah,
Anyways, we're looking for the magic lampposts and looking
yeah,
for the
yeah.
magic doors. And everybody was into that. Of my peers, it was like just the common thing. Where is that magical truth we're looking for in our music, our culture?
Mhm.
So I wanted a guru. And here's a guru that claimed that he could show me the magical doors inside through these meditation techniques. And I'm really primed to kind of imbue all sorts of like profound mystical implications in whatever experiences I had. To this day, I can't exactly sort that out, but I don't need to, because I know he was fraudulent in so many ways.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of what it is. So we thought that this little teenage kid was the Lord of the universe. And we thought every single atom in the world was all part of his play. And if he wanted to, he could change anything and everything. He just didn't want to do these kinds of things, because it's better that if we had faith based on our like Jesus said, blessed is he who has faith without proof. Basically, we thought that was a better way to be. So that's it. So I thought that he was God in human form. And we deprived ourselves of any of the criticism that really challenged that thinking. So I wasn't really open for a lot of rational debate about it.
Mm-hmm. And the cult, I guess, which is what you were alluding to before, tries to discourage you from doing that, tries to isolate you, like maybe a certain amount of isolation is part of it, because, people have sort of absurd idea, like all of us has probably ideas which are not going to withstand scrutiny, which we just kind of accept. But
Right.
that's not really a kind of a cult-like phenomenon, because we're not having a group that's constantly encouraging us not to look at different viewpoints, or to hold things up to, to question and so on. So I think there's the isolation might be perhaps a significant part of the cult-like phenomenon.
Yes, absolutely. And, I go further now. I'm thinking like this term is bandied out quite a bit from both sides. I'd actually say when we get into talking about wokeism, I think that what we're seeing is like a broad social contagion that's kind of turning a whole lot of society quite cult-like. And just by those same definitional kind of terms, that like information deprivation, real enforcement mechanisms that stop people from even questioning or even thinking about doubting kind of the ideology of wokeism, and certainly not discussing it openly. So I think that it's a funny thing. I think that we're seeing what I would actually call hardcore cult phenomena. We're seeing that in the culture at large. And I never imagined that I'd be saying something like this. And, the funny thing, I get in that debate with Steve Hassan, and I'm saying, no, it sounds like you're the one actually, Steve, that really would qualify. Believe it or not, you're like a follower of the mainstream media. You love the New York Post, you love the New York Times, Washington Post, office. And yet I say, nonetheless, as big as that is, I think that would qualify more for this kind of cult-like phenomena definition than what I'm doing. So
yeah, interesting. So cult, is there something, like you mentioned in the 70s, that there was this kind of mysticism and, being enamored with the East and all this kind of thing, and now we have wokeism, where there's this arguably cult-like kinds of things happening. Is there something in society that makes us more, or societies more likely to be cult-like? Is there sort of phases, do you think, or is it just kind of it happens just on a more just sporadic kind of way? Is there something in society that makes us more likely to be cult-like than at other times?
Yeah, I think so. I think that like I'm a big fan of James Lindsay, Stephen Hicks, these expositors and analysts of Marxism and cultural Marxism and postmodernism. They know tons more. I'm just a fanboy of all that kind of stuff. But what I've gleaned from my study of what they've had to offer is that in the 20th century, there was like just a whole multi-generational movement of a repudiation of classic post-Enlightenment liberal values of fact-based analysis and criticism. And I think that it's kind of like a religious phenomena. And I think Marxism is like a fair label for it. I think that it's a real Marxist thing. I think that Marxism in a lot of respects qualifies as cult-like, and certainly that. So what we have is academia falling to this kind of growing encampment of these leftists generation after generation, to the point that that's kind of all that's left in academia now. And they've taken over the social discourse on that professional level. And they're not subject to criticism. I mean, you know that as well as I know that in a million different ways. You might not attribute it to Marxism the same way that I think is fair. Mm-hmm. And so I think that's what it is. We have post-Enlightenment values that tell us that we should think for ourselves and question and really kind of develop an independent, I would say healthy ability to scrutinize and discuss things. And now we have new social trends that say, no, that's not good enough. It's not safe. It's too much. There's too much disinformation, misinformation, malinformation out there. It's a dangerous world out there. So you've got to stay within the four corners of the New York Times Overton window. And suddenly now we're into cult-like phenomena. So,
and we're going to get into this on the other side of the screen when you start talking to me, but what is your understanding of Marxism?
So I'm not a great student of Marxism. I really kind of avoided thinking about it or learning about it throughout my youth. But simply put, I think Marxism is it's a model of a lens that views the world in terms of oppressors and oppressed, and there are different ways that lens is tinted. I like the basic explanation that Lindsay and others have offered, which is that the Marxist expectation that the industrial world would eventually just fall into a revolutionary model because the workers would be so disappointed with their exploitation by the capitalists, the owners of all the goodies in society, that they would revolt. It didn't happen. I do believe that it's true, the whole story about how Antonin Gramsci, and there's another guy, the Hungarian guy, Lukács, I think, right? How they reconfigured the Marxist agenda or strategy to go after social institutions as a way of undermining kind of our society. And so Antonin Gramsci came up with like the basic 5 targets: the media, family, faith, the law, and education. And so this kind of transposed into, the development of the Frankfurt School, and then we have these guys coming over to Columbia, and just seeding academia with this kind of anti-Western, anti-intellectual. Well, it's a funny thing, they are intellectuals, and I'm sure in many ways a million times smarter than me, but nonetheless anti kind of intellectual rational scrutiny. That's I think a fair criticism. And so, and then we have it coming through my generation, the whole hippie thing, a rejection of rationality in a different respect. And now we have a culture that is just so obviously not up to the task of fair, rational examination.
Mm.
We saw that, that law school thing. Let me just talk about that for a moment. So when we did this resolution, what we were rejecting two things. I was implicitly criticizing the whole pronoun initiatives themselves. The idea that you come to court and you have to say whether you're a man or a woman, it's fucking ridiculous, I think. But also what we were taking issue was the fact that these lawyers that supposedly are trained to cultivate their innate sense of rational discourse. Everybody's got it. And the guys that are pretty good at it, they take the LSAT and they do well in school, and they're motivated. They want to become lawyers, so they really want to get into it. Now they're going to go to law school, and they're going to refine their ability to rationally scrutinize and argue. That nonetheless, these lawyers have no sense of the importance of actually debating this critical tectonic plate shifting agenda, which is suddenly to have people have to declare their sexuality or their gender. And it was incredible. And that's kind of what happened. The different leftist organizations within the law, they had no sense that it was important that we actually discuss these issues. So we brought a resolution saying, hey, all we want to do is affirm the principle that lawyers discuss things. And there are two sides to an issue, and we should respect and protect that thing with this initiative, the pronoun thing. All that they did was they attacked us as being transphobes and genocidal, and we didn't think that transgenders existed, and it's just crazy. Anyways, we did quite well in our resolution. Their whole thing was that nobody, that we're like the small little group of basement dwelling, kind of bigots. And even though they had the entire mechanism of all of the professional groups, because they're all so far left within the law, the Canadian Bar Association, the Vancouver Bar Association, the BC Bar Association, the trial lawyers, blah, blah, blah. They had, right before we had our AGM vote, they did a 10-minute segment on CBC on a Friday night. And they interviewed a law professor from UBC who said, look, I haven't read the article. One of the things we were complaining about was the way that an article that one of us had written, my colleague, Shadeen Farsi, had written this article, and it'd been posted in Canadian Lawyer magazine, and the transgender activists, and it was just criticizing in a very thoughtful way the pronoun initiative from different angles. And a bunch of these woke lawyers, including some benchers from our law society, wrote an open letter to Canadian Lawyer magazine, said that if you don't take that down, we're going to ruin you. We're going to boycott you. The boycott will spread province to province. You don't only have to take it down. You've got to take down. You've got to post a groveling apology, and you've got to tell us what you're going to do for the transgender activists from this point on. And Canadian Lawyer folded because people have their jobs, and I guess the editor didn't want to lose his. So that was one of the things we were complaining about. Anyways, when we did our resolution, all that we got was this kind of pushback that reflected the fact that even in the law, these people have lost the ability to realize that we debate these things. And the more kind of contentious the issue, the more important it is that we stay at the table and we have like a fair, frank, real, honest discussion. And these lawyers of all people have lost that taste for that. And so therefore, Anthony Gramsci and Luke Schaas, with their agenda to kind of undermine these important critical institutions, including the law, they seem to be kind of winning. So that's where it happened there.
From what I just want to try to summarize here. And this is the method which is called, I'm not sure if you're aware of it, it's called street epistemology, which is, I'm just going to give a shout out to Peter Boghossian, who's an associate of Lindsay's,
sure,
and Anthony Magnabosco, who I have a lot of respect for. Anyway, the method is that whenever you feel that you're not communicating well with someone, you don't turn and start to assert your own position. You try to step back and then agree upon some definitional things, or try to understand. You try to understand what the other person is arguing, so that you're not just like, fighting. You're trying to reach some kind of common understanding. So from what I can discern from your statement there is that your understanding of Marxism is a position that sees the world in terms of oppressors and oppressed. That's one aspect of it. The next is that it's kind of a anti-rational, anti-intellectual kind of thing that exists. So whenever we see, like, for example, the kind of trans activism stuff that's going on, because it's seeing the world in terms of oppressed and oppressor, transphobes against the transgender movement, and because it doesn't want to have debate or discuss things or anything like that, that means that is a Marxist kind of sort of some part of Marxism, because it's doing that. Is that, if I got that correct, in terms of how I'm seeing how you see this?
No, there could be lots of other ideologies that breed within their adherents kind of disrespect, even disrespect and a lack of focus on rational discourse. The fact that these guys do that doesn't mean that they're Marxists, and the fact that I think that they are Marxists, well, it does mean that they would be like that. So yes, the transgender activists eschew rational discourse. I think that's very, very obvious, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they're Marxists. Okay. They happen to be Marxists because they also think in terms of this critical power differential, and they see everything through that lens. I think that's the thing that most aptly earns them the designation as being Marxist. And plus, they're getting their ideology from Marxism. Like, I think there's a long continuous path that leads to that. They didn't come from nowhere. And I think that intellectually, if one does the work, there's a path that goes all the way back to some of the leading Marxist thinkers that actually breeds into this transgender phenomenon.
Yeah. So it's not so much the anti-rational kind of character of things. It's the seeing things in terms of this oppressor oppressed, and the power differential kind of thing that exists. So. That is generally what you consider, anyone who's kind of espousing that sort of position is at least has come out of, there's something that has been informed by the Marxist kind of position.
I think that. Yes.
Okay. And then the transgender stuff, and this is something we can get into a little bit more in the next hour, as to my views on that. But I don't want to take over your your situation with respect to this. So do you see the promotion of Islam that goes on, or the failure to address some of the problems of Islam as being rooted in Marxism as well? Or do you think you see that as a different kind of issue?
I think bottom line, I would say yes. It would never, I wouldn't have thought that or thought in those terms until things start to kind of come together and coalesce over the last couple of years as this extreme leftism stuff surfaces. I mean, there's a reason that Islam gets a pass. This is the Marxist connection. There's a reason that Islam gets a pass, whereas much more favorable treatment than other religions do in Western society. And I think that is a reflection of kind of a Marxist agenda to ultimately undermine what Marxism wants to do. Is it wants to change our world. There's no middle ground. It's not looking for progressive improvement of the system we have. It wants to destroy, and it wants to destroy with a utopian vision of some better communist kind of place where we have a better humanity, living in a completely utopian post-socialist world. And I think that Marxism will use anything, that impulse will use anything at its disposal that will help to bring down and destroy our Western world.
Mm.
And Islam is a very effective tool in that toolbox. So
you see Marxism as being kind of anti-Western,
yes,
an anti-Western kind of character to it.
yes, even though Marx, of course, was,
Because that's kind of one of the accusations of the postmodern element, is that they actually argue that Marxism was, you know, fatally flawed because of its embracing of various Western elements, and also its meta, you know, this idea that it accepts a meta narrative of progress. That's kind of one of the criticisms actually of Marxism. So, but anyway, so what's your beef with Islam?
God, it's been so long, I forget. No, I'm just kidding. When I say it's been so long,
so you're kind of you got dialed into this because of 9/11, is that correct?
Yeah, I hadn't thought twice about it beforehand.
Okay.
And then my beef with Islam is that it's inherently completely conflicted with fundamental, what I would say, Western post-Enlightenment values. The freedoms, the freedom of speech, the freedom of conscience, freedom of association. I mean, Islam categorically says that adults, let's say males, to keep it really simple, because I think that might be the distinction in some of, I think this is Quranic and not just Hadith, but certainly in some of the most respected scholarship that is crystallized of Islam since its inception. Islam says that adult males who happen to be sane, who apostatize and leave Islam, should be killed.
Mm.
So what's my beef with Islam? You know, my own cult was pretty bad, but we were allowed to leave, you know, Guru Maharaji without not on pain of death.
Yeah.
So I think right at the start, I mean, that's like a horrible ideology.
Yeah.
It says that blasphemers, people that disrespect and mock Islam and mock Muhammad, should be killed or at least punished, severely hurt. Those two things right there. What else do you need?
Yeah.
You know?
And so many people talk about, you know, that's kind of the religious text. Like this is just playing devil's advocate here a little bit.
Yeah.
But, because I think our view of Islam is quite similar, I would guess. But that it's a text. So you have these religious texts which say these things in them, but the believers, most of the believers, kind of just they kind of cherry pick from the text. And so is that a way, you know, if we can kind of encourage people to, you know, sort of not really pay attention to those kinds of bits? Because I think, like, I don't know, like, I'm not an expert on what the texts are, but I know there are these things that exist in that text, which if you were to say, I'm going to follow those things, it means, you know, all the infidels and the blasphemers and all, like, these people would be subject to serious violence by the people who take this seriously, this text. Right. But is there a way out of this by just, you know, kind of encouraging people to, you know, just not pay attention to those parts of the text? Or what's your view on that? Or is it just fundamentally?
Sure. Wrong? It's like hosting the annual prom, graduation prom for a very, very, very liberal high school. This high school is so liberal that we're even going to have like a treats table right next to the punch bowl. And the punch bowl might be non-alcoholic because we don't want anybody to get hurt driving home, but the treats table has various drugs on it. And so we've got some pot, because pot is legal in Canada now. And there might also be some fentanyl. And we discourage people from taking the fentanyl. So, you know, we're hoping that people only take the pot and disregard the fentanyl. There's fentanyl within Islam. there are some like very dangerous prescriptions and directions and edicts, and they're protected by Islam's wonderful ability to protect its own dogma, its own doctrine. And so they're right there, and they're right on the same treats table. And so if our hope is that someone will get into Islam and ignore those directions, it's pretty weak. It's pretty weak. What would be better would be to neutralize them, to get authorities within Islam to say, you know what, we're going to remove this from the table. But good fucking luck on that, because the Quran is the word of it's perfect word of Gabriel and Allah, and it's incontrovertible. And so that's the problem. We can't get these things, can't get the fentanyl off the treats table.
So do you think that there's something about Islam that makes it different from a religion like Christianity? Like, people often will say things like, you know, if you go and you look at the Old Testament and there's like comments about, you know, that people should be stoned to death, or that, you know, there's a story about God saying people should be stoned to death. Is there something about Islam that makes it qualitatively different than all other religions that have these kinds of, you know, nasty sort of historical circumstances attached to them?
Yes, quite. Well, for one, I mean, just everything. For one thing, nobody's saying to any Christian that that they can't leave, they can't criticize the scriptures from within the religion, and they can't criticize it from without. They can't leave and look back and criticize it unless they really want some serious trouble, like perhaps being killed. And they can't stay within and criticize it either, because it's the irrefutable word of God. And so it's not like this horrible stuff, the fentanyl's on the table. In Christianity, that's not the case. There's just a million ways around it. You have some kind of obscure texts that talk about God directing some violence against some identifiable tribe of people who don't exist anymore today. And it's not like an ageless, timeless, universal direction for all followers, all mankind, which is quite a big difference in itself. And people are free to criticize it. They're free to actually advocate ignoring it. I mean, you have the progression from the Old Testament to the New Testament throughout Christianity. That in itself, I mean, so many things evolved within the scriptures itself. But the Quran has its own progression chronologically, but that chronological progression stops at the end of the Quran. The Quran's not in chronological order, but if you put in chronological order, the Quran stops at the most dangerous, aggressive, and violent set points. And that's where it stops, and there's no further dialogue that's possible. And so that's why we have all these people that from time to time can convert to Islam, and they're looking at it, they're saying, well, okay, this is a great dance. I'm hungry. What's over on the treats table? Okay, there's some of this and there's some of that. Okay, well, how about this over here? And nobody can say otherwise. All they can say is, God, I wish that guy wouldn't have done that. I wish he would have not looked at that part, not picked up that thing to eat.
Yeah, I think there's a woman by the name of Sarah Hyder who is part of an organization called Ex-Muslims of America. And I listened to an interaction with her and Sam Harris on his podcast. And she made the point, which I hadn't really thought of before, that the Quran is different than the Bible, because the Quran is the word of God. Like it's arguing that it is the word of God, whereas the Bible is just kind of a collection of stories, which some say is like, you know, that's been collected. So when you look at the Bible, it's got a more one place removed kind of look at it, where you can
exactly, even when it does supposedly quote God, it's hearsay. Just like you say, it's one step removed. Whereas the Quran is not. The Quran is supposedly just directly the word of God, and you can't fuck with that.
Yeah, so it's like if you have a story that's been recorded about what God, if one is going to believe that, I'm an atheist, so I don't accept any of it, but I certainly see that there's a difference between a story that's been kind of compiled, and one can say, okay, was that story really accurately kind of, if you're going to believe that, was it accurately the case or not, and questioning that, versus here's God telling you this and this and this and this, and if you don't do this, then you are in fact kind of giving the finger to God and all the kind of horrible things that are going to happen to you if you do that. So I think there is a bit of a difference in terms of how the text is perceived in the religion,
Quite,
which
quite.
might have an impact.
And it's also really important to understand the compensation scheme in Islam. So if you want to go to paradise in Islam, which is kind of what it's all about, that's the great reward. The
Mhm.
only certain way to go there is through jihad. I mean, you can try to kind of live an exemplary life as a really good Muslim and have all of your deeds weighed on Judgment Day, or you can just simply participate in jihad, and you could die that way, and it's a surefire way into paradise. And if you took that goal seriously, you want to get into paradise, you would take that incentive structure seriously as well. So it's just another thing. So the problem is that the West wasn't up to like really examining Islam fairly, because we were already so down on the West by that point. You know, by 9/11, we almost kind of it was our own self-criticism and weak lack of respect for the West itself that fueled the kind of Islamic fury against the West. I think it all feeds into itself. In fact, I'm reading Douglas Murray's latest book, The War on the West, and he actually makes that point. And I thought, yeah, that's really true. So I'm stealing it, which is that I think that that even our own hypercritical denigration of the West here in the West really kind of created like an ideological propaganda, if you will, vacuum that allowed Islam to kind of embolden itself. So you get the hijackers coming to Hamburg, Germany, and they have like they meet at a mosque and they get to know each other, and there's nothing in the dominant culture of Germany that inspires them to look outside, right? And so then they become more radical, and the next thing you know, they're offering their services to bin Laden, and then we have 9/11. What if Germany had been like healthier and hadn't been so kind of hyper self-critical, had picked itself up in a kind of healthier way after the Second World War, and wasn't in, so it's once again, I lay all of this at the feet of the left.
Yes. So the West, so as far as I can tell, one of your arguments is that because we don't really appreciate the West, the Western kinds of values, I guess.
Right.
We don't really have the strength. We don't really have the cultural strength to resist attacks that are coming from these illiberal kinds of elements. One, which is Islam, but there's other, like that. This is kind of ties into the trans activism stuff and so on as well, right? Is that you have these illiberal kinds of activist kinds of elements which are able to take root and kind of destabilize things, because we are not really appreciating the West, what the West has accomplished and developed and so on. Is that correct?
Yeah, so much so. I mean, we can't even mobilize to face that threat, to kind of marshal our own best arguments against it, but we're not enjoying our own confidence in what we have and appreciation what we have to offer kind of any sort of alluring alternative. I mean, there's something inspiring about patriotism, where it's well-deserved. And anybody that says that they have no taste for that, they're lying. I mean, everybody has felt some of the taste for it. Everybody at least understands what it's like to feel kind of pride in the right kind of mythology, right? So you look at, like, for example, when I'm old enough to remember when America had its bicentennial celebration, and everybody could feel that. Like, this is celebrating lots of the American, you want to call it the myth. It's only a myth in that it's a simplified history, that kind of highlights some of the critical points from that myth. Anyways, whatever it is, it's inspiring and people liked it. And if there was more confidence, more appreciation, and we had a Canada Day after and this is, I guess we'll get into talking about this with you. I'll ask you about this when we get into the whole residential school thing and the hysteria, the purported hidden graves hysteria. We had a Canada Day afterwards where Canada Day became a day of shame, and our Prime Minister directed that all flags be flown at half-mast. And I mean, so someone comes to Canada, let's say they're a new immigrant to Canada, and let's say they're Muslim. So they have the choice. They can either stay within their silo and just really kind of, they want some inspiration, they want some motivation in life, they want goals. Well, they've got it there within Islam. That's not kind of declining at all. Or they've joined this new society and they can kind of embrace some of the values of the outside society. Well, what are those values? Those values are at half-mast. Give me a break. There's nothing there, right?
So, but I'm just kind of interested in this thing called the West, or like what is the essence of that? Just so that people can understand, like you can have people who are patriotic and so on about things that perhaps they shouldn't be patriotic about, or like someone who's part of Saudi Arabian society or whatever, some kind of regime that we would.
That's not the West, though. Yeah, that's right. So
what is it about the West which is so important to kind of support and so on, in your view?
Yeah. Okay. So to be clear, by the West, I don't just mean Alberta and British Columbia. I mean, every place basically within every place that was like directly influenced and shaped and even kind of like a host society for the Enlightenment, everything kind of funneled through the Enlightenment. In other words, Britain and Western Europe and all of the progeny of the fallout of the British Empire, every place that benefited from British contact and British institutions. So, you've got a little bit of India in there, even a little bit of it, but certainly Canada and Australia, all of that. So what is it? Well, and so now what's your question about that?
So I think as an example, I think that the Enlightenment, you just mentioned the Enlightenment. So, is the Enlightenment sort of shorthand for what we're trying to get at when we talk about the West, or is there something broader than the Enlightenment that we're talking about?
Okay, but sure, because the Enlightenment really helped allow certain things happen in the scientific and ultimately economic arenas. So all of the advances of capitalism and the industrial world and all of the scientific accomplishments of the past 150 years, I would put them all on the side of the ledger sheet that is on the Enlightenment side of things. And I'm calling all of that the West. And we should be able to enjoy a simple confidence and pride in that. You're not going to get anything more sophisticated out of little kids. Little kids can wave flags. Well, there's nothing wrong with little kids waving a Canadian flag. They don't even really know. They just know something's pretty good. And there's a reason they can have that. They can have that in the States. There's lots to be proud of there. And there's lots to be proud of in Canada. And doesn't this sounds crazy to even speak this way now, right? Instead, the only way we're supposed to be, what we're supposed to do is we're supposed to give land acknowledgements, and we're supposed to kind of be constantly tiptoeing around in shame. We don't really belong here. I'm not sure where we belong, but I'm sorry. it's that Canadian sorry has been extrapolated into like kind of an anti-Western shame tick.
Mm. And is sort of the goal for all humans to become part of the Enlightenment? Is that sort of how you see the future? Is that
Yeah.
to bring the Enlightenment, to make it available to all humans, regardless of where they happen to live in the world?
I think so. I can't think of any model that actually would supersede it. So in other words, the Enlightenment respects and develops the ability of people to kind of have their own conscience and their own assessment of facts and their own analysis and their own kind of values and discussion, all that. And if someone were to say, okay, that was pretty good for a while, but now we have something that even supersedes that. Okay, well, you'd have to even use Enlightenment values to persuade me of that. And I can't really imagine it, but it might come about. It'd be like a very kind of futuristic, maybe AI thing. Maybe someone's going to come up with some cyber model of a human replacement that doesn't need any of this kind of dithering and so-called, kind of analysis and conversation. So maybe we can use the Enlightenment to finally accept the time that it's time to flip the switch and go into some sort of new cyber future. But short of that, yes.
So final thing, we've got 10 minutes left, Jim, and I definitely don't want to miss this one, which is Trump, the Orange Man.
Right.
So now you're a Trump supporter.
Yeah.
I believe. And so why do you think Trump should be supported?
Because of his innate thoughtfulness, his humility, his ability to articulate nuanced positions without any kind of self-aggrandizement. I'm just kidding. So he doesn't have any of those qualities. Okay, he doesn't have any of those.
Well, the Trump I know, but
no.
You study this. I kind of just watch the different arguments on this. Like I'm not a fan of Trump, but I'm interested in why people. I do realize it's a phenomenon. Like it's a massive phenomenon, and
it's amazing. He was such a. Sorry, I'm interrupting. Go ahead.
Go ahead. No, but I think certainly Trump has tapped into some disenchantment with the existing system, which I definitely think we should pay attention to. But you see it as being more, there's more to it than that, I think. Like, for example, I know that one of the arguments that I do appreciate is that there's this kind of really elitist kind of character of things like CNN and so on, which and looking down on people who are struggling in the Rust Belt states and so on, and seeing them as being uncouth and all this kind of stuff from snobby, people who are in Silicon Valley and all this kind of stuff. So Trump, I think, sort of fed into that kind of disenchantment of what exists. And perhaps it's even a broader thing of what's called the globalist kind of fraction of capitalism, which is the high tech firms and the people who put pronouns in their bios and things like that, versus the kind of blue collar working class blue collar types of producers who are now suffering, which no one seems to pay attention to within society, and the disenchantment that comes with that.
So I think one of the advantages of being a conservative, and Trump in some critical ways, he's not just superficially a conservative, he actually is a conservative. And it's the same way that I feel that I'm kind of a conservative, is that one doesn't have to have like a very kind of novel, advanced, innovative new scheme of things. You could just be a naysayer. You could just be someone, and think about Trump's background when he's doing The Apprentice, which I never watched, but I have an idea of how that show went. So Trump's the guy that gets to say, yay or nay. People keep bringing him stuff, and he says, no, not this, not that. He's got a sense of kind of what works. Because that got him in that position to begin with. He's like the big tycoon, and now he's on this NBC TV show, and people bring him things, and he can say yes or no. And I think that's what he thought America had lost. That America had some real great strengths and successes that the left had kind of lost any appreciation of, and were kind of giving away. And Trump was saying, even long before he got into politics, but he was a big political gadfly commentator, right? I mean, people would go to him. He had an interest in politics for decades, and so he was more than happy to share his opinions. And his opinions were basically, hey, that's bullshit. That's bullshit. You don't need to do that. You don't need to do this. You just need to kind of resonate within the strengths of America and refine that position. And that's considered to be kind of retrograde and kind of Neanderthal by the left. But I think that's basically Trump's form of conservatism. America ain't so bad. Our model, our capitalist model wasn't so bad. Our culture ain't so bad. There are good people on both sides. And when he's talking about that in Charlottesville, he's just saying, hey, there are good people in different ways on all sorts of sides of these various issues. Chill out, people. Chill out. Mm-hmm. And I think that, like, it's really horrible what the left did with Trump right from the outset. And I'm very interested in a few things. I'm interested in the Durham prosecution that's going to start on May 16th, where he's going after one of Clinton's lawyers and going to prove what I firmly believe, which is that the Clinton campaign, in cahoots with lots of people within the kind of intelligence community and others, framed Trump with this Russian collusion bullshit. And that carried on even into, and it was a cloud over his presidency to begin with. Mm-hmm. I'm very interested in this new film that I'm going to see the online debut on Saturday, called 2000 Mules by Dinesh D'Souza, that apparently shows with kind of undeniable proof that there was an orchestrated scheme to have these people exploit the mail-in ballot drop boxes and just totally flood them with votes. And so, like, I totally believe that the election integrity what's the word I want to say, mantra, the best election, safest, cleanest election of all time is totally bullshit, and that Trump is right to question and in fact claim that the election was stolen from him. I think that's the case. I don't know where America is headed with that. You're talking about the globalist thing. I think Canada's in really bad shape. I think that Trudeau has this preternatural, unhealthy, and certainly unexamined relationship with the World Economic Forum and Klaus Schwab, who heads up that thing. And I would have rolled my eyes at any of this globalist talk. I didn't like that term until about a year ago, but I think it's totally justified now. And you have this guy, Klaus Schwab, saying that he's got like half of the Canadian cabinet in his back pocket, and these guys have gone through his training. And I never voted for that. I didn't vote for Klaus Schwab. I didn't vote for the World Economic Forum. Trump is kind of, he stands against all of that. And so I stand with Trump.
But do you think that there's something to this? And I agree. Like I saw this global, because of course, being a historical materialist myself, I see globalism as being the future, like human beings, species beings, and so on. Us not really seeing ourselves as being part of a nation, but being seen as part of the globe, the human species. So like talking negatively about it, I sort of thought was odd. But there seems to be the two kinds of, at least within the capitalist context, those who see global capitalism as being the future, and those that see national capitalism as being the future. So there seems to be a conflict between these two ways of looking at capitalism, whereas, and like the Hillary Clinton kind of view would be sort of the global capitalist kind of vision versus the
Justin Trudeau as well.
So Justin Trudeau, the same thing. versus Trump, which would be the national capitalist
Yeah,
kind of vision. Is like,
right.
what's your views on that kind of conflict which exists within the system?
So once you've kind of thrown your lot in with the globalist agenda, you're basically abandoning any of the prospect of any. There's no plausibility to the sense that any one person's going to have any say about anything. It just is way too big at that point. Your democratic input means really nothing. And so your value, your autonomous value as a person means nothing. And at that point, the system has lost any semblance of working for you. It's not doing that for you. You're working for the system. And I think we're really sliding to that fast. And Trump is saying, even if we could at least maintain the American model, which after all is a Republican model. So it's not so bad that we just have a federal government. We have like an association, a network of states. So it's a little bit smaller. And you have some political democratic autonomy. And therefore you matter as an end result, not just as kind of like a means to serve the globalist ends. So I think that the nationalist model, especially on the Republican footing that America has, is more respecting the individual. And I care about that because I'm an individual and I've got a mind and I got a mouth and I could change what I think and say today and tomorrow, but I want the freedom to be able to do that. And I want to be able to impact other people's ideas. And I want the state to not think that I'm just its thing. You know, now these World Economic Forum guys, they're basically saying that we got too many people and that we should really promote senior euthanasia. Well, I'm approaching seniorism. I'm gonna be seniorist at some point.
What's this about senior euthanasia?
Maybe it's not an ideology. Maybe it's a biological reality. But no, I mean, like, what's the value of a 92-year-old person? Like, what do they matter? You know, who do they matter for? Canada, I think, is as I say, sliding towards a state where that person means they don't matter at all, and that we should their attacks on our resources. And this is the idea that it's the people serving the state or the state serving the people. And I think Trump stands more for the proposition that we matter as individual people. Even funny little hairdo, orange man, bad Trump, he matters too, and his kids matter, and we all matter. And I think the left doesn't appreciate that.
On that note, we've reached an hour, Jim. So I think we've covered many issues. And now I'm going to turn it over to you so you can ask me questions about my views on some of these matters.
Good. Okay, good. So Frances, as you said, I first got in touch with you when I noticed you after the Quillette podcast, and it was all to do with your just very healthy academic kind of responsible thinking and consideration of some of the things with respect to the residential school phenomena that happened, the hidden graves, the purported hidden graves, and how you suffered immediate horrible blowback and ultimately you were fired from Mount Royal University. Is that what it is? Yeah, in Calgary. Yep. And I thought you sounded great. And so I reached out to you and you foolishly responded to me and now we're friends. And so how's it going? How's it going for you?
It's going pretty well, I guess. I'm finding it, I'm getting used to the circumstances. I have, sort of constant worries about what is going on because there's like on a personal level, it's possible that I will not be able to re-enter into the university system, which I find to be very distressing.
You're still hoping to do that.
I am. I think it's definitely possible, but there's a lot of forces that are stacked against it, and it's all going to depend upon how the sands shift. Like it's all going to be dependent upon that. So there's the personal angle of it, which I find distressing, but then there's the wider, societal, generally civilizational kind of questions that are being raised as well, which is, are we entering into a totalitarian phase of our existence, which is not going to be, it's going to be a terrible situation. So, it's interesting when you're, you sort of think, well, what was it like for people, who are, in Nazi Germany in the 30s. So, sorry, my sister's calling me here. I'm just on a call, Catherine. It's funny how you have situations where people think that like they never call me, and then I'm on a thing and they call me. So how did people in Nazi Germany, what was happening to them in the 30s and the 20s? Like did they have a sense of things moving in that direction and so on? So I'm quite worried that that's sort of where we're at this time. So both of those things are bothering me a lot, and we won't really know until after things happen as to whether that's going to happen. And so my own view right now is all I can do is fight it out. I have to fight it out as well as I can with the information that I have. That's my own perspective.
Right. Okay. So regarding that, I think everybody knows you, and everybody that would be watching this appreciates that you're in some kind of procedural battle. Maybe it's actually court litigation, or maybe something administrative. Could you just summarize kind of what fronts you're fighting on? Is it more than one front procedurally? And if so, what they are and where you're at?
Yeah, so the situation is that I was fired in December 2021, and there had been ongoing for about a year, had been all sorts of grievances being filed, because I belong to a faculty association which is defending me, and there's a legal system that's attached to this faculty association, which is good on one hand because it means you're part of a larger entity that has more resources than you do personally. That's on the upside. On the downside is that the interests of the faculty association might not completely align with your own personal interests, especially if the faculty association has been taken over by wokeism, which is identity politics, which has become totalitarian. It's not exactly clear what that situation is with respect to my faculty association. But anyway, so there's 10 grievances that have been filed over the last year, and they're all going forward to arbitration in January 2023. So in about—
These are your grievances, grievances.
Yes, in 8 months. And I've been told that that's just absolutely amazing that I have not just one, but 10 grievances going forward. And what's going to happen is that there's going to be an arbiter who is going to evaluate the cases that are put forward by the lawyer of the faculty association, and then the lawyer of the university. And I will be absolutely gobsmacked if my case is not successful, because
Really,
like, I think that I'm going to win. I'm going to win my case because it's so ridiculous, everything that's happened, unless the courts have completely turned, like, unless things are just much more unfair than I think they are. But so that's just one part of it, though. So I think I'm
So
going
who's
to.
the arbitrator? So what do you mean arbitration? Like, is this a professional arbitration that the union and the school are committed to go before? Like, they're an arm's length. They're not part of the system. Who is this arbitrator?
So
Not by name, but you know what I mean.
yeah, so I believe there's legislation that governs these disputes between unions and employers. And then
Okay.
there has to be an agreed upon, it's agreed upon that this is going to be, it can be a panel actually, or a single arbiter. But in my case, it's a single arbitrator, I think it's called, because it would be too difficult in terms of timing and everything to get all the machinery happening. And it's going to be 2 weeks of hearings. So anyway, so that's been agreed to. And then we're going to, both sides are going to be putting forward their case over 2 weeks in front of this arbitrator. And I'm going to be cross-examined by their lawyer, the university's lawyer, and the university, various people in the university are going to be cross-examined by the union's lawyer. And then the arbiter is going to hear all this and is going to make a decision as to whether the termination was justified or not.
Okay, is there a discovery process? Are there examinations for discovery? In other words, does anybody get examined under oath beforehand, like in a civil lawsuit?
I
Depositions.
don't know, but I do know that we have to release all the information that's pertinent to the case.
As do
So,
they, as
for
does the other
example, I
side.
was talking to the union's lawyer and I mentioned that I had recorded everything since 2019. Since the fall of 2019, I've recorded all meetings and everything. And the lawyer said, just so you know, all of those are going to be, you're going to have to release all those to the proceedings, those recordings. And I said, great. That's what I want, is I want all of this to become public, including all those recordings, because I think that's going to really show how, like, Star Chamber kinds of proceedings and everything that have been going on. So I don't quite know what that process is, though, but I was everything that I have that pertains to this case when I was employed, I have to release that to the proceedings. And the same goes for Mount Royal, as Mount Royal's got to release everything that it has.
All their emails, all their behind the scenes communication.
And it's very important that that happens, because what occurred over the period of the year is they withheld all sorts of things, like investigation reports. So there's all these investigations that happened. There was all these reports that were being, compiled. And even though I had to respond to those reports, much of it was redacted and withheld. So there's all sorts of information that I have never even seen, which I really want to be able to see. So the other part of it is that I want the arbitration to take place according to what's called open court the open court rule. So
right.
we want everything to be public, and that's
Can you demand that?
Yes, I am asking the union to demand that it happen. Now, the university obviously is not going to agree to that.
Yeah.
Because
so who wins that fight?
So what happens is it goes to the arbitrator to decide whether it's going to be held according to those principles. I think we've got a very good case that it should be
public interest,
and as well, almost everything that is going to be looked at has been made public already. So a bunch of stuff has been released on a website that's being developed about my case called wokeacademy.info. on that website, a whole bunch of stuff has been released already. And much of the stuff that concerns us in this case concerns Twitter, stuff that's happened on Twitter and Facebook. So
Right.
it was already part of the public domain anyway. It's not like a whole bunch of secret things happen that no one knows anything about. It's pretty much all public anyway. It's just a matter of the kind of legal reasoning
Right.
that's going to go on about it. So I'm very, very hopeful that it's going to be open to the public. And as well, there's organizations that are applying for intervener status
Oh, great.
in the arbitration.
People on your side, I would imagine.
Justice Center for Constitutional Freedoms is one that's doing it, and there's
Great.
probably going to be other kinds of scholarly associations, because my case is probably the most important academic freedom of expression case that has happened in the last, well, maybe ever, but certainly within the last 10 years. And it has implications, it has wide-reaching implications for
Academic freedom.
for all universities, for
Totally.
amazing implications. And if this case is lost, well, my view is universities are over as
Have you been in touch with Jordan Peterson? Have you been in touch with Jordan Peterson
yes.
by
So
chance?
and actually he's been helping me a lot in terms of publicizing my case. So that's been very good. And there's a number of sort of free speech types of professors who have been helping me
Okay.
as well.
All right.
That's been good.
So is this a fair statement that basically your position for which you are in trouble is that you raise a critical eye to some of the anti-dominant culture, indigenous or supposedly pro-indigenous doctrine associated around the residential schools, and specifically the idea that there might be these mass graves, and you just you wanted to question some of the dialogue about this and what was being said, just the very nature of the dialogue, how open and expansive it was, and you just wanted to open up the discussion. You had your own views, your own questions, and that's what you're in trouble for. That's what you got fired for. That was considered to be a bridge too far.
Well, there was two sort of sides of the whole quagmire. The first was the pre-2020 period, where this was before people tried to get me fired. So there was the period before people tried to get me fired, and then there was the period after people tried to get me fired. The period before people tried to get me fired, I was asking questions about various woke ideas that were being put forward.
Yeah.
And the three major ones were indigenization, so incorporating in what's called indigenous ways of knowing into the curriculum, the trans activism file, and the anti-racism kind of initiatives that were starting to be pushed for. So in this period before 2020, before I guess July 2020, I was just going to meetings and asking questions about these initiatives, and people were becoming more and more annoyed about those questions being asked. And a number of people in various complaints that were put forward, was saying that this was unacceptable to be asking these questions. And this, in fact, was harassment, that I was asking these questions, and that we should really just be taking a promotional kind of position on all these things.
Yeah. And then July 2020.
Yeah, and then in July 2020, what happened is that Wendy Mesley, the CBC journalist who was suspended and basically had her career ended for referring to the book title White Niggers of America by Pierre Valliere.
Right.
I started to defend her reference to this book title, and a bunch of people who were already angry at me for asking these questions started to go after me for this and mobilize an anonymous student group against me to try to get me fired. So that
Okay.
started to happen in July 2020. And what happened at this time is I then kind of realized that rational discussion was no longer working in trying to interact with people. And perhaps a better way to go about this would be to start to satirize this wokeness. That
Did
was
you have supporters along the way, either in the first period, or then after, when you took up that particular cause about that CBC producer? Did you have supporters, in-house supporters in academia?
Yeah, so I do have quite a large network of support, which is not very apparent for people looking from the outside, because they're not vocal, like they're not vocal. And there's a number of people who are
So they're
very,
ghosts. You've got ghost supporters?
but they're just not aggressive. Like, so for example, one of my, and he's going to be on the Disputations next week, is Sinclair McCrae, who's a philosopher who is just a great guy, very intelligent guy, very very, very thoughtful. He's been supporting me, but he's very intellectual. He's not an activist, so he's not on social media, first of all. So he's just making arguments that make sense, and he's very well respected and so on. So people like him.
Did you have anybody at Mount Royal? Anybody on faculty at Mount Royal that was
so
open?
he's at Mount Royal. So he's
Oh,
at
I
Mount
see.
Royal. And
Okay.
then I created a group in 2016 who called the Rational Space Network, which is still in operation to some extent, but I'm no longer there. So it's kind of on hiatus while all this gets sorted out. Anyway, there was about 6 people, very, very strong, part of that network, who are very supportive. And then there's about 15 other people who are sort of on the outer circle, who are still supportive, but they're just, they find it difficult to put forward their views in a vocal way, because they're afraid they're going to be targeted, and then they're going to be subjected to the same kinds of tactics which have been happening. So
Okay, so period 2 is up to the CBC producer, and then we're still not at the residential school issue yet.
no,
So
that was part of the satirical warfare. So I started this character on Twitter. So I turned my Twitter account into a satirical character whose name is Frances McGrath. And Frances McGrath is modeled on Andrew Doyle's character, Titania McGrath, which is a satirical character in the UK. And so when people were trying to get me fired, I was satirizing their attempts to get me fired and congratulating them for doing such a great job in trying to get me fired. This is what I was doing with the satirical character.
Was it obvious that it was satirical? Did people pick up on the McGrath name, and just by your nature, was it obvious that you were a satirical parody, or what?
Well, some people got it and some people didn't. Some people didn't understand. I think generally you can sort of see it, but still there's people who don't understand and talk to me as if I'm real. And then I do what Andrew Doyle does, is that I just engage with them as an aggressive kind of woke person. And
Isn't
then
that kind of a form of online grooming?
Anyway, so with respect to this situation is that, and then I got hit with the harassment complaints about this, because I thought that I would, because people are trying to get me fired, I thought using their words applying to me, and congratulating them, I thought that, like, they're calling me for example, an epistemic terrorist was one of the accusations. So then I called myself an epistemic terrorist. But anyway, that was found to be harassment. Because
of who? Your ridicule, your satirizing them was harassing them.
Yes.
Oh my God.
I know. So that was crazy. I was really surprised about that. And because I was tagging this person on Twitter and saying, congratulations, you're doing a great job trying to get Frances Widdowson fired, because I tagged them, that was seen as being harassment. So I I was told, I was directed, you must not direct your satire at any member of the MRU community. That was the direction that I got. So I said, I didn't think that was very fair because they were going after me. So I thought, why can't I satirize their attempts to go after me? But I did abide, I complied with their directive. So I didn't do that anymore. I just started to do general satire. So this now feeds into the Canada Day massacre.
Yeah.
So Canada Day, just to give people a background on this, is
Right.
that Canada Day, the Canadian Historical Association
Yeah. I'm listening.
said that Canada was genocide. Everyone agreed that Canada was a genocidal state. That was the Canadian
Yeah.
Historical Association. And I started to become very, annoyed about them, first of all, making this kind of argument that everyone agreed when it was not true at all, that everyone agreed. So that was happening. And then there was also the unmarked graves thing that started to unfold at this time, and people saying that, the 215 murdered children in Kamloops, when it hadn't even been established that there was any bodies there. So those two things, historian who used to be at Mount Royal, but now is at University of Manitoba, whose name is Sean Carlton, started to go after people who were celebrating Canada Day and calling them genocide minimizers and saying that was just, they were disgusting for doing this and so on. So that started to annoy me because I know people who celebrate Canada Day and they are working class people who just want to have a day off and take their kids to see some fireworks. And for this professor to be calling them genocide deniers and so on, I thought was really not I thought that was really annoying.
To hear you having to justify your appreciation of and support for someone who celebrates Canada Day is reminding me of when I appeared in court earlier this morning and I heard these various lawyers offer their gender pronouns. It is like so much undermining just the norms that I'm sticking with. And how crazy do you have to defend some? Anyways, that's it.
Anyway, so just to continue
Yeah.
on. So anyway, so I was following these people tweeting things and I was taking their words and exaggerating it slightly and then putting it back at them. And so what happened is that this Cowassus case came forward, which was the 751 unmarked graves that they claim. But this was not even a cemetery attached to the residential schools. It was a community cemetery that was attached to a hospital. And there had been grave markers, but the grave markers had deteriorated and had blown away. So there was no mystery, there was no discovery, there was nothing. It was already known that was just kind of an abandoned cemetery where the grave markers no longer existed. Anyway, this started to be compared to Auschwitz and so on, and like these horrible kinds of genocidal things that were happening because of the quote unquote 751 quote unquote bodies. And anyway, so at one point, after seeing a whole bunch of different and being kind of having this become continuously exaggerated, I put out this tweet that was quite close, and this had been building up, so I've been doing other kinds of tweets as well about this. My tweet was, for those of you who want to celebrate Canada Day after hearing about the killing fields at Cowassus of the 751 murdered children, you are genocide minimizers. Why don't you celebrate Hitler's birthday while you're at it, you disgusting ghouls? That was my tweet of the Francis McGrath, which was like exaggerating the ongoing kind of comparison between Auschwitz and residential schools, Canada is a genocidal state, and so on and so forth. And then I put a Canadian flag. I got this off the internet of someone who else had done this, a Canadian flag with a swastika on it as the kind of the thing. So
Yeah.
you guys are celebrating Canada Day, you are the same as someone who's celebrating Hitler's birthday and so on. And it was obviously that I was mocking those people who were equating the Cowessess situation, which was just like a cemetery that everyone knew about, which had nothing to do with Indigenous children. Like there might have been some Indigenous children buried there, but it would have been like tons of people being buried there, and it had nothing to do with the residential school anyway. And that kind of comparison between that and Auschwitz or something like that.
Yeah.
Anyway, when I put that tweet out, everyone went crazy about it and was saying that I was mocking dead children and that I was minimizing the Holocaust. And I was like, this is not, I was mocking the historians who were comparing the 751, abandoned cemetery graves with Auschwitz and
did you have any neo-Nazis that were criticizing you for making light of Hitler's birthday?
Anyway,
okay,
I was doing this anyway, and I thought that was completely within my rights to do that because I had been directed not to direct anything at the MRU community. So I wasn't directing anything at any individual. I was just, doing this satirical thing, which was trying to draw attention to the craziness of comparing the Cowessess case to Auschwitz. That's what I was basically doing. Anyway, so a whole bunch of people started really kind of telling me this was terrible and that I should apologize and so on. And I was like, ah. And the Students Association of Mount Royal, shortly after that, put out a press release denouncing me and saying that I was creating a culture of fear on campus by what it was I was doing, and that students shouldn't have to take classes with me because I showed a tolerance for lethal behavior, and I wouldn't be able to grade them without racial bias for what I was doing. Anyway, that whole kind of episode was one of the reasons why I got fired. That candidate, that thing trying to draw attention to the craziness of comparing the Cowessess abandoned cemetery with Auschwitz. Like I was trying to draw attention to that kind of.
And you were also, I would imagine, in your fun, but your pointed fun. I mean, sarcasm, satire is fun, but it's meaningful, can be meaningful. Were you also comparing the Cowessess place with the Kamloops issue? Because Kamloops was writ large at that point, right?
Yeah, so it was like, so there was a bunch of different quote unquote discoveries, which they aren't even discoveries because nothing's come out of Kamloops at all, and it's highly unlikely. It's possible, but it's unlikely that there's clandestine graves in that orchard. And then there was a bunch of other ones too. So whenever one of these things would come to light, there would be this barrage of social media, incredibly irresponsible type of commentary coming about it. And I was just kind of, every time one of those things would come out, I would do a satirical. So I did about, I guess, 5 satirical tweets, maybe 5 to 10 satirical tweets on this kind of unfolding situation, which was just basically hysteria that was happening. And my satire, I was trying to kind of show that I was not taking this seriously at all, what was happening. I thought this was these were ridiculous claims that were being made. And that's what my satirical kind of approach was doing, is I was trying to say it's ridiculous to compare Canada to Nazi Germany. That's a ridiculous kind of comparison to be making. And we need to just stand back here and have some actual evidence that we are going to compile about this before we start racing off and doing all this kind of, sort of crazy talk about this, Canada's a genocidal state and all this kind of thing. So that's basically what I was trying to draw attention to at the time. And I was kind of just embroiled in this, all these kinds of ridiculous tweets that were coming out on all sorts of different things, and just kind of reacting to that, and slightly I was employing the tactic of slightly exaggerate, not by a lot, because there's people saying KKK Canada and all this kind of stuff, and genocide this, and Nazi that, and all this kind of stuff. So it wasn't really all that much more than what was being said. It just kind of compressed it into an exaggerated form.
Yeah, and how could an intelligent, thoughtful person, a woman of letters by profession, not indulge in a little Swiftian fun, like that? I mean, why not, right?
As well too. And this is something that was the other problem is, for many years, since 2016, colleagues at Mount Royal had been defaming me on social media. And Mount Royal gave me the impression over these years, because I wasn't complaining officially, but I was just sending them material saying, just letting you know that this is happening and people are poisoning my environment, and this is due to your, sort of indigenization kinds of policy and so on. But Mount Royal gave me the impression that social media was not considered to be a workplace. That's what they did over a number of years. So I really, at the time, didn't really think social media was going to be something Mount Royal was going to be, going through all my tweets and analyzing them to see whether I would, and they actually kind of were now seeing it as a workplace matter. So my putting forward a tweet on my own private time as a private citizen was being seen the same way as me being in a meeting at Mount Royal talking about some kind of curriculum change.
Right.
That was kind of what they were doing. So that was another unexpected kind of development, which I had no way of kind of knowing about ahead of time, which still has not been, Mount Royal still has not really given clear guidelines for what they expect professors to be doing with their private social media accounts. That's still not clear from all.
Don't they have to formalize that position in order to carry through with your arbitration? I mean, that's one of the live issues here, right? And they've been
that's going to hopefully be what happens. So, we're going to get down into it as to what, the rules, because as the collective agreement says in it, that I cannot be punished. Faculty members cannot be punished for violating a rule that they did not know existed. That's part of our collective agreement. So I had no idea that this was a rule, like based upon my experience and what I've been doing and how I've been seeing things unfold for 5 years. So now, because
even if only now, after the fact, they hammer out a specific rule, and you turns out that you're on the wrong side of it, surely you've got an argument that's kind of like an ex post facto kind of position that you should be held responsible for. So, okay, I've got to ask you this. If it turns out that they actually do a proper exploration of the apple orchard in Kamloops, and it turns out that there are maybe not even 215, but 216 graves there, and the whole issue is to what every single one of them, their story is and how they got there. But nonetheless, if it turns out that there are all these graves there, does that harm your anything that you've ever said? Does it harm your the skepticism that you brought to the issue? Because in a sense, everyone that will have said that had done their mourning in advance. You know, we don't know for a fact they're graves, but we're going to assume that they are, and we're now going to go into our like mass nationwide mourning and abject shame phase. They just got it out early. They're going to say totally, they're going to feel totally vindicated. It doesn't matter that they kind of put the cart before the horse. They're going to say that, you know, that's all good. And anyone that raised an eyebrow against it is going to be slammed for being unnecessarily skeptical and thus racist, you know, otherwise. So what do you think if it turns out that, yeah, lo and behold, there are all these graves here? Does that harm you? Does that harm your position?
It doesn't harm my position in an intellectual sense, because it's an implausible scenario. So, you know, definitely historically, some things which are implausible turn out to be true. And so you shouldn't really be punished for being skeptical about implausible scenarios that turn out to be true. So that's kind of,
I agree with that.
You know, but the problem is, of course, is that, like, I think still, it seems to me, just looking at it, and this is in this piece Billy Remembers, which I did on it, I kind of just trace all the kind of evidence which exists, and it just seems highly unlikely that if you were going to be having clandestine graves and burying children, you would be doing that secretly. You would not be waking children up in the middle of the night to get them to come and dig graves. And if you want graves to be dug, you're not going to be getting children to do that, because the children are not going to be very good at digging graves. And you know, as someone who has dug holes in the ground, that is not an easy thing to do. Like, that is, you know, so all these kinds of things are, they make you sort of skeptical that that's the case. I hope I've tried to be, as much as possible, to say, look, I don't want to say that's impossible, that's the case. Like, one has to have an openness about things. But at the same time, one has to say, you know, like, this doesn't seem to be a likely kind of scenario. And all the people who just rush to say, and even if there are 215 bodies that are buried there, that doesn't mean that those, even then, that doesn't mean that you have murdered people there.
Sure.
And then a whole bunch of people said murdered children, and then that still went on. Like, I had colleagues who said thousands of murdered children, and then a whole bunch of churches got burnt because of that. And they actually said, I can kind of understand why churches are being burnt, you know, after these people heard about the thousands of murdered children. Like that seems to me to be very, very irresponsible of them to be doing that, even if it turns out that it was right. Like they could be right. It could be found that, yes, there were thousands of murdered children. But for them to say thousands of murdered children without any evidence that there's murdered children seems to me to be the irresponsible kind of position, even if it turns out to be right. And that's a difficult thing for people to understand, is that it's kind of the critical thinking process,
yes,
not the result, that is the important thing to have happen. And, you know, one has no control over the actual outcome of things, but one can employ critical thinking skills, and then, you know, one still has to, you know, say, well, I'm going to go wherever the evidence leads.
Right. And I read that article. It's really good. And it's a great analogy to the Michelle Remembers. That's where the title comes from. The kind of mass hysteria that went with the recovered memory, satanic abuse, childhood, sex abuse phenomena, the McMartin Play School thing, and then Michelle Remembers the split personality thing that was actually, I think it festered, or it erupted in my town right here in Victoria. Wasn't that like a big place for it? I wasn't in Victoria at the time, but like I think that's where it all kind of came about a lot. And I was in the States during the McMartin Play School thing. And I think that's possibly a very kind of telling parallel. We'll find out. But I want to ask you this, because I see that, you know, I've got a couple questions and we're going to run out of time. I want to ask you conversely,
20 minutes.
if they actually do the examination, I can't say the exhumation because that assumes that there are bodies in graves there. But if they do the proper examination and it turns out that there aren't the graves there, to what extent does that vindicate you?
Yeah, well, I think it shows that skepticism, should have been employed. Like, I think we've suffered a lot of effects of this, what appears to be hysteria, which perhaps can never be recovered, like we can maybe never recover from. And one of the worst things is like the kind of belief that some indigenous people have now, that, the residential schools were there to basically murder
Pol
children.
Pot killing fields, right?
Like that sort of sense, I think, is out there, when one is kind of an improbable scenario that is the case. So I think, and then of course coming down on the people who are raising the alarm as well about it was the other kind of really terrible thing that happened. Me being, I guess, the worst casualty of it is that because of the hysteria and because of my attempts to put a brake on the hysteria, I got the blowback from all this kind of woke kinds of elements, and then they demanded that I be fired for that. And it's still going on. Like, there's still people saying it's a really good thing that I was fired because of that. I was saying that the residential schools had some educational benefits that they provided, which I think is just a truism. Like you can have educational benefits provided and still have some children who were murdered. If it is the case that they like the murdering was not, like, the residential schools were not put in place so that children could be murdered.
No, they were better than the schools at Auschwitz.
It's these kinds of crazy sorts of things. And so I think, if we ever get to that stage, which is still being kind of there's stonewalling going on about it, where, supposedly in January 2022, on the Fifth Estate program, Manny Jules, who was the previous chief of that Kamloops band, was saying, we agreed that we're going to do excavations. That's what he said. So that was now agreed to. So we now need to do that. So let's find out what the situation.
Do you know of anyone that's actually trying to follow up on that, either with Jewel himself or any associated organization, RCMP? Do you know of any kind of effort to kind of move that ball at all? No. Okay, so let's say January 23, you have your hearing. The arbitrator, the panel, they reserve for maybe a couple of months, and then April, right on Hitler's birthday, you're exonerated. Okay.
Yeah.
So okay, and so now the door opens up and you're able to go back to school. Can you imagine what that will be like for you? Will there be contrition on the part of any of your colleagues, anyone that will step up and apologize, shake your hand, anything like that? Or are you just going to be so cold-shouldered?
But I'm already, see, this is the interesting thing is that, so I was involved with the faculty association. Well, I should say, I'm hoping it's going to be on May Day, like Karl Marx's birthday. I hope that is what is going to happen. I think that would be the very fitting kind of date.
Of course.
So I'm a member of the faculty association. I'm going to the faculty association. So I'm going to Mount Royal every week, and I'm still there, and I'm interacting with colleagues, and I'm doing all sorts of things.
There's not a restraining order against you
No,
going on campus, and I mean that seriously. There isn't.
yeah, I know. Well, I'm just kind of operating like I generally do still. So everyone is seeing me all the time, and they know I'm there, and I have nothing to be ashamed about or anything. I feel that it's just completely ridiculous what's happened, and there's a number of people who support me and go for beers with me and all sorts of stuff like that. So I think that over the next year I'm going to be a sight. I'm going to be seen all the time in the faculty center. So that's good. The problem is that although I think I'm going to win the case, the arbiter has to determine whether my employment relationship is still viable.
That's kind of a Pyrrhic victory should you win, but he says otherwise.
So, but I've said many times, I don't see why it's not me. I'm not the problem here. Like, I'm doing what I should be doing. The problem is these woke faculty members who don't think that their views should be critically analyzed.
Totally, but they can't make the kids take your classes, right?
But many people are happy to take my classes. It's like, and many people don't even know. Like I was teaching from September to December 2021.
Right.
Everything went great. Like everything, even though I
sure.
got like all this storm had happened and everything and whatever, most people didn't even know about it. So it's like,
Right.
many students they're just wanting to go to class and get their degree and do stuff. They're not involved in these kinds of ridiculous, so the Students Association is denouncing me as creating this culture of fear and all this kind of stuff. I'm teaching my courses and there's no problems at all about it. So so everything is perfectly viable. There's no problem. The only thing that is happening in the background is that there's a group of about, at the most, 50 professors, and that's highballing it, because there's about 20 who are hardcore totalitarians, and then there's about 30 others who are in varying degrees of agreement. They don't want woke ideas to be critically analyzed, and they get angry whenever that happens. And they're the problem. They've just got to be told, you guys are in a university and you have different points of view that are able to be expressed. And Frances Widdowson, although she has a view that you don't agree with, she has a right to ask questions about what you are proposing. And she's not doing it in any kind of sarcastic, uncivil way. And, she's just asking important questions that, and if you don't want to answer them, you can just say, I decline to answer. Like there is no problem here. But unfortunately, the administration is just so afraid of these woke, this kind of loud, aggressive contingent, that they just kind of fold over at any sign of, whatever. But I'm hoping that going through this process and exposing many of the things that have happened will allow people to say, look, this has really kind of gone off the rails, and we need to kind of restore the university to an academic kind of space.
You need your own reconciliation day. You need your own reconciliation day. So have one of the remedies that you've requested in arbitration, is it for a formal apology should you win on the substantive points? Have you asked for a formal apology?
No, not at this time. And for me, it doesn't really, I don't really think apologies.
You don't, I think that's everything. I mean, wouldn't that be the thing?
Well, no, but I think me being reinstated, all I want is, I want to be reinstated. That's all I want. I want to be reinstated. That'll be, if I'm reinstated, that's going to be huge. That's going to be a huge thing. And that's all and, I think and that's part of my, the reason why I was fired is because I told them, look, I think there's been a lot of mistakes that have been made by the administration and everything. Everyone's confused. So I'm perfectly willing just to withdraw everything that I've, sort of the demands that I've made. If you just give me a 6-month sabbatical to make up for you removing me from my sabbatical, to get me to go through all these star chamber kinds of processes. So I don't want anything except for my 6-month sabbatical, and we'll just call it a, because what happened is when Mount Royal allowed these faculty members to go after me with these harassment complaints, that led me to file all sorts of harassment complaints against the people who've been defaming me on social media for 4 years, because I said, hey, if you're going to use these policies, then you should at least apply them equally to all people. So there was just like this huge, ensnared complaints. And I said, look, I'll just back off, and I don't want to have anything proceed with any of all these other complaints. All you have to do is give me a sabbatical for 6 months to make up for all the time that you've taken away from me. And I'm that's it. I don't, and do your social media policy now to tell faculty what you expect from them in terms of social media stuff. And so everyone knows what's going on and so on. And anyway, so they said in their termination letter, the fact that you've demanded a 6 months sabbatical shows that you do not understand the terrible kinds of things that you've been doing for the last,
You're not fit to teach. You're not fit for public consumption.
My being completely reasonable and saying to them, you guys have botched everything up, and I'm perfectly willing to back away and not do anything. They saw that as evidence that I was this unreasonable person who could not accept responsibility for the terrible things that I'd done, which, like, on what planet is that, something that people could accept, that they're trying to have me follow rules that I don't even know exist. And I've been defamed for 4 years, and they've done nothing. And then now when I try to defend myself, they're pursuing me. And well, anyway, so
hypocrisy from the far left. This is unprecedented.
Well, I don't, as I mentioned, we don't have very much time, Jim, to talk about this, but this for me is not a left-wing.
Okay, we could disagree about that. I see it that way.
It's a woke is reactionary, and things like trans activism, which are about people who say that you can change sex, and someone who's born XY chromosomes, who now thinks that they're a woman, can go into women's prisons and women's change rooms and women's sporting events. That has nothing whatsoever to do with labor, class politics, these kinds of ownership questions, economic ownership questions, which, Marxism, historical materialism, that's the focus of historical materialism is labor and who gets the value from labor and who owns the means of production. That has nothing to do with this kind of trans activism kind of stuff and pronouns and whatnot.
As Lindsay describes that, I think that at least he calls that vulgar Marxism, the economic focused Marxism. As opposed to the kind of broader, more active current cultural Marxism. But anyways, we've done our 2 hours, right?
Yeah.
How was that for your question?
As an answer to that, there is no such thing as cultural Marxism. The focus on culture was basically moving away from the economic character of it. So I see actually all this kind of, and that's what I refer to as the reified postmodernism stuff that Lindsay and Pluckrose really did a very good job talking about in the Cynical Theories book that they do. So I have
go ahead.
So I have a lot of respect for Lindsay,
yeah,
in terms of the work that he was doing in that book, because he really did identify with Pluckrose this kind of terrible totalitarian reified postmodernism thing, which was all about making real the identities of oppressed groups. But Marxism is not about identity politics at all. It's about
So
actual
he explains
objective class politics.
he explains in his subsequent book, recent book, Race Marxism, which is really focused about critical race theory. He explains how his own thinking evolved to the point where he's very comfortable now designating that as Marxism. And he explains that.
And I'm looking forward to reading that book.
we'll
Like,
love
I'm
it.
really wanting to look at that book and examine it, and maybe he's going to convince me. But I was looking at the Paulo Freire
Right.
kind of thing. I was listening to that, and it's just, you know, again, it's like saying Freire has these kinds of messianic things, and he's a prophet and all this sort of thing, and that's just like what Marxism was all about. Like, it's like there's a big gap that for me is not, and I see it as the actual co-optation and using the, it's like the, what Orwell was talking about in 1984, calling something by something that it's not, so that you confuse people when they don't understand what's going on anymore. So I think that Lindsay, well, I haven't read the new book, but I'm going to read it. But I really do not think that he has shown how that is historical materialist, that kind of going into identity politics, when I would consider it to be a co-optation and a misuse of it, so that you can get the people who think of themselves as being left-wing and so on,
As
to go
Marxists.
along with this reactionary, actually what I consider to be quite fascistic kind of approach of this trans activism and critical race theory and the authoritarianism that's existing within that kind of perspective.
So then why don't we schedule another dialogue?
Yes, we're going to have another one.
Okay.
Didn't even get to the, so what I'll do is I'm going to read Lindsay's book on the race Marxism. Is that what it's called? Race Marxism?
Uh-huh.
I'm going to read that.
Yes.
And then we can have another session to talk about whether it was a correct analysis or not.
That would be great. I'd love that. Okay.
Anyway, so Jim, that was very, very interesting. We still have a lot of things to hash out, but
Totally.
I think we've given the audience 2 hours of interactions, which they can chew over until the next time that we're talking. So I just wanted to thank you very much for appearing on Rational Space Disputations.
And thanks a lot, Francis. Pleasure knowing you. Pleasure talking with you. So, and this goes up where you have, this will go on your website or a YouTube channel.
Yeah. So I'm just gonna end the recording now.
Okay.
Thank you.